My name is Mary Conquest. I'm your host for Safety Labs, the podcast where we explore the human side of safety to support safety professionals. We move past regulations and reportables to talk about the core skills of safety leadership: empathy, influence, trust, rapport. In other words, the soft skills that help you do the hard stuff. This podcast is created by Safety Products Global, the world's leading manufacturer of safety knives. Through our trusted brands, Clever, Slice, and PHC, we empower companies to prevent injuries by providing safer cutting tools for every material and application. Hi there. Welcome to Safety Labs. We talk a lot about human and organizational performance, or HOP, on the Safety Labs podcast. Not because we endorse any one approach to occupational safety, but because it's a hot topic in the safety world. Today's guest has a nuanced view of HOP that we'll discuss. We'll also discuss a recent post he wrote on LinkedIn about applying HOP principles to a high-profile accident, the discussion that post engendered, and what it says about views towards accident investigations. Trevor Farr started his career as a utility operator in the dairy industry. Over the ensuing 21 years, he worked his way up to a position as an environmental health and safety manager. Along the way, he earned his certification as a safety professional and now holds a Master's of Engineering, Advanced Safety Engineering and Management from the University of Alabama. Leadership, specifically safety, is an outlet for Trevor to build connections, to practice care, and to gain people's trust. He recognizes the importance of relationships in the workplace and the soft skills needed to influence and provide strategic value to any business. And Trevor joins us from Bristol, Vermont. Welcome.
How you doing, Mary? Glad to be here.
Good. Okay. So let's start with a broad look at HOP. And as a refresher for listeners who need it, I guess, the principles of HOP are: human error is normal, blame fixes nothing, context influences behavior, learning is vital, and response matters. That's obviously incredibly condensed, but that's the broad overview. Trevor, is there anything you want to add? Like, how would you define HOP?
Yeah, and like you said, to piggyback off them being very broad, those don't have to be your principles either. Some people, have 6, 7 principles, but HOP is really just, it's a tool in the toolbox of many things that safety professionals and even just leaders in general can look at to transform their mindset and their view of how their organization operates with humans.
So what isn't HOP? I asked you what is HOP. What isn't HOP? In other words, what do people most often get wrong about HOP?
Yeah, I think it's not really this causation to increase of injuries. It might be correlated, but a lot of times that has to do with this level of psychological safety that we want to build as leaders and safety professionals, where we want to inquire humbly, ask, open-ended questions, and really dig into things and get people to open those floodgates up, report those little tiny things, report those near misses, those risks. We can't fix what we don't know, right? So you may very well, and in my experience, see increases in injuries, but that doesn't mean those things didn't happen the previous year. Those hazards and all that work still happened the previous year, right? Nothing changed. But what did change is giving people the comfortability and the confidence to come forward when we respond as leaders and show that we're willing to listen and follow through with things.
So then I guess what you're saying is a lot of people maybe criticize HOP on the basis of they feel that it doesn't lower injuries, or they think it even increases injuries. Is that something you hear?
Absolutely. And it's really not something you can grab. It's not this physical, tangible thing, right? It's not like I'm going to take HOP and I'm going to incorporate it and integrate it into everything that we do here, and it's going to be like the new flavor of the day, right? It's not some lean management tool or a Six Sigma where we're going to make everything super efficient and we're going to find all these errors and all these faults and things are going to go away. There's a lot of criticism that it can't be measured, and that's true of culture. That's true of psychological safety. It's true of so many important things in the workplace, like trust and care. Like, we shouldn't measure those things. If somebody does, I'd be highly skeptical. And the same thing with HOP. We can't measure it. It's hard to see. You're not going to see results overnight, over the week, maybe even a year. It may take a couple years for for big change and change management to take place and to really transform your culture and how you look at incidents and even successful work. So that is one of the criticisms is the lack of being able to measure it, right? That lack of certainty with it.
Yeah. And you also mentioned lack of efficiency. And I think too, like from what I know of HOP, efficiency is not its number one priority. It's, as you said, digging in, humble inquiry isn't necessarily efficient. In what situations do you think implementing HOP principles is most effective? So I guess I mean, like, what types of organizations, or maybe at what maturation stage an organization is where you think HOP is probably a good idea?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it can work for all different types of organizations, even authoritarian organizations, military, sports, some of those ones that have that more authoritative culture. I think it can work in all those organizations, and I think it can be slowly effective at all different levels of maturation. It is going to be very tough for organizations that can't move away from applying agency when there's incidents and things happening. What I mean by that is, the blame and shame and not wanting to learn and really inquire and make sense of why these things are happening. And a lot of those cultures are what Edgar Schein calls your anxiety avoidance cultures, right? Those companies that do not want to change and they're just survivalists. They just kind of stay where they're at. They get stagnant. That's going to be really hard to adopt all five of those principles. You might adopt small things, but it might not work as well at that maturity level.
Yeah, I think there's an underpinning of, if you don't want to learn, probably no tool is going to help you learn, really. Is HOP new, do you think, or is it kind of repackaging older ideas that had been circulating before in safety?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's another one of those criticisms that you see. And I don't think it's new. It's not this, and I always tell this to, employees that I train in onboarding and stuff in organizations is this isn't a new flavor of the day or decade, this revolutionary groundbreaking thing that we just discovered and now we're going to go do it. It is a repackaged, rebranded. It's a lot like, high reliability organizations one decade turned into resilience engineering another decade. And then we have safety differently. And so we have all these things. And probably in the next 10 years, we may have another name or term that comes out. A lot like Taylorism. 100 years ago, you still see elements of that in business today, but there's terms like lean management and 5S, and now it's 6S, right? So I think it's very comparable to other elements of organizational function that just changes terminology. And we're still very terrible at those five principles, right? There's things we've known about for a long time, and we are still not great at adopting them and accepting them.
Yeah, I suppose that, if the criticism is this is nothing new, then the response you're saying is like, well, sure, but we clearly haven't got it yet. So maybe we look
Correct.
at it this way.
Absolutely. We don't have a good foot to stand on, right?
So are there some valid, and now I'm not saying that other criticisms of HOP aren't valid, but what are the criticisms of HOP that you think are maybe kind of the most, I'm not sure what to say, important, reasonable, valid? What are some criticisms that you think people should be aware of, I guess?
Absolutely. And there's a lot of them out there. I think the principle that gets the most criticism, and there is some support, is the number 2 principle that blame fixes nothing. And I have seen a lot of credible people in research that does say that there are cases where blame does change behaviors and influence people in a constructive way, although it's not always fix something or have merit, right? We don't want to just start with blame, but we may have to work our way to that. We probably don't want to call it blame, but we got to at least inquire, learn that context, and practice sense making before we start pointing fingers and judging people right away.
Yeah, so I guess blame isn't it's not that it's not necessarily the answer, it's just maybe not the best place to start from.
Yeah, and I think when Todd Conklin called it blame fixes nothing, I think it kind of just emphasizes the importance of what blame can do and how detrimental it can be to your culture from a negative standpoint. I don't think it was really meant to say that it fixes absolutely nothing, but I think just the analogy of it to really heighten the importance of let's not blame yet, anyways. Let's really dig into this and learn what's contributing to these, why it makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough when you're trying to share ideas. You often do come up with essentially slogans, and by necessity, when it's like a short little phrase, you can't include all the nuance in it. So there's usually more to it behind the phrase.
Absolutely.
So you actually touched on this, but in your view, does HOP increase or decrease injuries? Or how does it interact with that?
Yeah, so I think it's both. Again, like I touched on earlier, I think you're going to see, in my experience, people reporting things that wouldn't have normally been reported previously, just from the culture. Maybe it's just some of your leaders. Maybe it's the way you're measuring things and you don't want those metrics to get upset. And then I got to report it to my stakeholders, right? So I think it does when you start to get the workforce to accept these principles and they see that leaders and managers want to learn and go out to where normal work is happening and really start to follow through with some of these things. They, small cuts, small, I see reports of just a fingernail broken, just little ticky tacky things. But then every now and then there will be a near miss or something that could be a PSIF, something potentially significant that has always been there, always been a PSIF risk, but it's never really been communicated from that workforce. It's been normalized over the years. So I do see that it will raise those injuries, those rates, and that's part of the learning curve that HOP can really, really help out with.
Yeah. Okay. So we're going to return to our chat in a minute. But first, I am going to take a minute to talk about Safety Products Global, the company behind the podcast, and do a deeper dive into some of their more popular safety knives across their brands, which are Slice, Clever, and PHC. In warehouse settings, safety competes for attention with, efficiency, productivity, that sort of thing. Traditional box cutters can rust or dull, and that means laceration risks and productivity slowdowns. One of the solutions to that are the slice box cutters. There's a manual retraction one like this one and an auto retract option. It's an award-winning ergonomic design, and I didn't prep this, but here we go. I'm going to show you in my super high-tech demo. It's ergonomic because of the way you hold the blade, right? The way you hold it requires less force to pull than to push. And also it wraps around and protects. You can see my knuckles are protected from staples and that sort of thing. The blades also never rust. They're made from engineered ceramics, and they last up to 11 times longer than traditional metal blades. In addition, they have a finger-friendly blade that is safe to the touch. Now, you can cut yourself with this, but I wouldn't be touching it like this if it were a traditional metal blade. If you want to learn more about which tools will work for your materials, you can request free samples. Go to safetylabspodcast.com/samples. Okay, now back to our interview. So I'd like to continue talking HOP, but I want to do it through a case study. So there's a little bit of setup here. Bear with me. Recently, there was an accident at LaGuardia where an Air Canada plane collided with a fire truck on the runway. Both pilots died, and there were multiple injuries. After the incident, you posted on LinkedIn, and there was a lot of discussion. So I'd like to read the post and use this as a bit of a case study to discuss the HOP principles in terms of accident investigations. Firstly, I want to say there's an important context. This was posted 48 hours after the incident. There was very little information available. And certainly by the time this podcast is published, we'll have more information. Hindsight is always 2020. So here's the post, or the important part. Applying human organizational performance principles to this incident can enhance learning, causal recognition, and ultimately improve system resiliency and capacity. The mapping below represents my initial effort based on some research and limited findings just a few days after the incident. It serves as a primer to instigate sense-making in a complex adaptive system. consider the potential outcomes of a learning review involving key stakeholders and sharp end workers. The insights generated could be invaluable. And this, dear listeners, you're going to have to picture this in your head. It was followed with sort of a mind map style diagram, which showed links in several directions and different sections. And those were air traffic controllers, environmental conditions, engineering controls, communications, fire truck response, human factors, and standing operating procedures. Okay, I'm going to zip it pretty soon, but there were 43 comments on this post. So I wanted to ask about your response to some of the points that were made in that. Is there anything else that you want to add about the initial post?
Nope. Only that, it took me maybe an hour. And so this could have been much more in depth, could have gone back more in time, could have really dug into the culture. LaGuardia as an airport wasn't on there, so there's so much more, and it was just me. So
yeah, this was more of a proof of concept. This was not like, ta-da, I've solved everything. So, okay, so the first one is causal learning. And now I'm not quoting directly, but these are just some of the points that were brought up. Causal learning is perhaps a misleading approach because it exists in a specific belief system. We don't know anything, just that we have to watch out for witch hunts and scapegoating. So, yeah, what's your response to that? The idea of causal learning at this stage?
yeah, so I'm not sure what the intention of that comment was, but it's likely that a lot of the comments on there, and maybe that one was jumping the gun to some conclusions, making some assumptions, which there's nothing wrong with that. And I really think that's what it's tied to, is just jumping the gun. Like you said, it's only 48 hours after, and we don't know a lot at that point until the professional investigators, right? The NTSB, the FAA, and those people really start to dig into that.
Yeah. Someone else commented, and this, I don't think this is critical, but just on the importance of foregrounding questions and making the distinction between observations and inferences to resist creating narratives, which is what I think you might mean by jumping the gun.
Correct. Yep. And so what we want to do is have a good starting point for the learning. We don't want to, we want to recognize that we have biases, and that we're going to come into this ready to fire off what we think, this person, was stupid, or they clearly were at fault, right? We want to try to recognize that and go further out into the system as a whole. And, we still want the agents on there, right? But we want to really look at what are the systems, what are the processes, and gather that context. And that's really what the mapping process can do. And the inferences, the map was really built around a lot of questions. These are the open-ended questions that we really want to start our learning review at, so that we can dig even further.
Yeah, I've done something similar in a completely different realm, in the realm of content, but I find that it's not even the finished product so much as the discussion, because you did it by yourself, but in the ideal world, this sort of review process would not be a single person, right? It would be discussion between a lot of different stakeholders, I guess.
Correct. Yeah, you would want to include people at the sharp end, right? Your controllers, pilots, leaders at the airport, all different levels of stakeholders. You may have only a few investigators, and that's where some organizations, I'm sure the NTSB is really good. They're at a very, they've had plenty of reactive opportunities, unfortunately, to respond to these. But a lot of organizations do not like to include a lot of those sharp end workers, interviewing the right folks, even interviewing people that weren't directly involved, right? And then you really start to learn some of those influences and some of those near misses and normalizations and interactions of different processes. There may be only a few investigators. And so the challenge with having a few investigators is that sometimes they're the ones that judge what's fact from fiction. And that's a very constructed term, fact. What one person may find to be a fact, someone else may not. You see that in juries all the time, right? We get hung juries. Why does that happen? Right? So you got to be careful if you're just going to have the investigators gather all this information, sit down, and then determine, well, this is fact, this is fact, this is fact. I think you really got to pull in those sharp end workers and the people that have different perceptions and experiences as well.
Yeah, I think fact is it comes back to measuring, right? Like in the analogy of a jury, like this witness said they saw someone do something. Is that a fact? Well, the jury has to decide, because they have to decide, is that witness credible? Or are they lying? So, but that actually brings me to the next point, which was there were a couple of posts that sort of, or comments that pointed to this. We can only work with evidence and facts. We need facts to prove system weaknesses instead of just assuming them.
Yeah, and that was a great comment that really provoked further, deeper conversation. And I remember working with that gentleman in the comment thread to kind of meet in the middle, come to terms, and agree. You know, we can agree to disagree. Facts and evidence are great, and that's what investigators are paid to find, right? And that's what our society, our culture, our politicians, whatever, pressure those people to do that sometimes negatively pressure, right? But what we really want is stuff that's correlated too, not just stuff that's causal factors or causation, but what's correlated. You know, is there something in our culture that we can't measure that allows some of these risk-taking decisions and things to happen, right? That's not necessarily a fact from a measurable standpoint, but it's definitely clearly something you can learn about and apply it for the future to move on and make it better.
Yeah, I think an example of that is any kind of commercial pressure, whether it's production or whatnot. Like we want you to do things safely, but there's also this huge commercial pressure to continue with production. And therefore, some risk taking sometimes in some places becomes normalized, because it's like, well, sure, we have to be safe, but we have a deadline or whatever.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you brought that up, because I just read something yesterday that sparked my mind on that. So, and I don't know if it's true or not, but what I'm reading is that this air traffic controller stayed on, and it's kind of against their recommendations when something like this happens. So you have to wonder what their mental state is to continue making decisions on that runway. And so you start to, well, why did they stay on? Because they only have two people on at night, so they already have a high workload. We can't stop planes. We still got stuff going on. So we need him to stay on. So there's that organizational pressure right there. What if he made another bad decision? Because he's already behind the eight ball, right? He's going to be mentally unstable after something like that happening. So there's a risk that the organization's taking as well. And so, there's a lot of risk taking, and mapping that out, interviewing, asking those open-ended questions will find some of that risk taking behavior and activity.
Which leads me right into the next one, which is about the mapping itself. So mapping the questions is a good way to present them, this commentator was saying, but that a traditional investigation, given enough time, is going to do the same. Like the mapping isn't that important. So what do you think about that?
Again, when we talk about we don't have a good foot to stand on, I think when you look at previous investigation reports and the terminology and the agentive language and some of the blame, there's not a lot of good reports out there. And so I think we have to transform this investigative process and even change investigation. Why don't we just change it to inquiry? And why don't we change the investigator to inquirer? Right? Just that change in terminology right there kind of opens up, the floodgates, kind of sets the even playing field. I think I really do think that we have to get better at our investigations. I work for a lot of organizations that still use investigator, safety officer, things that don't really help us. We're behind the eight ball when we really want to learn and investigate things. And I think the mapping, it really, if you put in the middle and just said, why did this make sense? And then you just start to branch out from there, and everything's fair game. You're not going to see a lot of investigative reports. Andrew Hopkins has had some good ones, but a lot of reports that include culture, include decisions made by upper CEOs, budgetary decisions, things that definitely correlate to why we're doing what we're doing. So I think it's a little bit of both. There's probably some good investigations out there, but I just don't think there's a good foot to stand on and continue down the path that we are. We've got to change the language. We've got to dig deeper and find more of that context, just like the HOP principles.
Yeah, I think changing the language, I know lots of people would say, well, what's the difference? A rose is a rose. But it signals to people like, hey, guess what? We're reframing this and we're doing something different here. So pay attention. And everyone learns differently, but mapping, I have always found, like, putting it up visually in front of everyone, they often see concepts that are not maybe connected on the map, but they're like, oh, wait a minute, we're talking about this now, but it's actually circled all the way back to a seemingly unconnected or disconnected topic. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like putting things out in front of people, spreading them out, makes it a lot easier to see where we are.
Yeah, a lot of people are visual learners, right? So this visual management can be really key to getting some of your sharp end folks, if they're sitting in a learning review, to open up even more. And it's natural the way our brains work and the things that we think of. The map can capture that dialogue and capture that conversation. And just because it's on the map doesn't mean it's necessarily relevant, but we're capturing it. And then maybe we'll come back to it, like you said, at another time. And oh, actually, this is related to this. And then it just sparks even more inquiry and dig deep, even deeper.
Okay. And then another one, I think that this person was talking about the map, but it says clearly shows that errors are not causes.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, please comment on that, because I have to admit, I'm not sure I fully understand what they're getting at. But
Yeah. So what they're getting at really is principle number one in the HOP is that humans are fallible, right? Humans make mistakes, we make errors. And so we don't want to fix the human. Okay. 99.9% of the time, these are not bad apples, right? The bad apple theory is that it's a bad apple air traffic controller that made this decision and we need to fire him. We're going to set an example and this will never happen again. No, that's not true. What we want to look at are what are the system weaknesses, where is our processes and system brittle, and it allows this air traffic controller to make this mistake. It's absolutely horrible, and I'm sure this person, has to live with this decision for the rest of their life. The system failed him, right? The system failed him. How was this allowed to happen? And that's what we need to look at when we're mapping and really diving deep is, does our system have the resiliency and the capacity, right? And margins, a lot of terms thrown out there in the safety profession that kind of mean the same thing. Do we have a buffer so that there is a place where we can make mistakes because we know we are just unreliable, as humans are unreliable? Can we make mistakes and not have something as undesirable as that consequence happen, right? What can we put in place? So when you look at the map and what that person is saying is, oh, we're looking at the lighting system on the runways and the automation that's involved in that and the fire truck transponder and all these other technological advancements and systems that are in place that can create margin.
I was thinking, my husband always says everything is comms. He works in emergency radio. But okay, so is there anything?
I got a good example.
Oh, go ahead.
So you mentioned your husband. So I get into a lot of conversations with my wife, and there will be something in the news, and a perfect example that I've shared is someone leaving their kid in the back seat, and your first instinct is to, well, that's a dumb parent. I would never do that. And it's usually the best parents in the world. And what happened is something within the system changed, whether it was the routine or the habit of the day, or there's something on their mind. Something changed, and the system didn't allow them to account for those changes. and they just went about their day and they forgot, right? They didn't wake up that morning wanting to leave their kid in the car, just like this air traffic controller didn't wake up that morning wanting to have that plane crash and kill two pilots, right?
I find people who are most judgmental about that scenario have not experienced the sleep deprivation that is parenthood because it's a real factor.
It is.
But anyway, is there anything else I want to shift focus, but is there anything else about HOP that you'd like to say about that, what you'd like people to understand about it?
Yeah, and a lot of what we talked about today, I think the biggest gap in organizations that HOP can really help fill is learning-based safety. A lot of companies are just stuck traditionally at a certain step in the process, and they're really just stuck in single loop learning, and causal mapping and HOP really wants us to get into double loop learning, where we don't just say this is why this happened. We continue to find other contributing factors to why that happened. So like if you take the LaGuardia incident, maybe there wasn't a transponder on that fire truck. Okay, well let's dig into budget and other decisions, standards. Is it required or is it just recommended? Like, and then we just say, well, it was just recommended. Okay, but don't stop there. Why was it only recommended? What contributed to that decision by regulators to only say recommended, right? So we want to have that double loop learning where it's just constantly, the wheels are constantly turning.
Yeah, double, triple, quadruple loop, really. Like there's no, I don't think there's a point where you can, like, clearly budgets don't allow never ending investigations, but I don't think there's a point where you could, like, budget aside, say that we've learned everything about this. I'm sure that there's, just like science, there's always new questions, right?
Absolutely. You can go revisit something that happened 10 years ago and find new things.
Okay, so I also want to talk to you as someone who has shifted into safety more recently than many of our guests. So can you describe your transition into safety and why did you decide that path and kind of what steps did you take?
Yeah, so I originally spent 4 years in quality management in a couple different positions for food safety, and realized that it really is aligned very well with safety. There's still regulations, there's still food safety standards, and so it was in my wheelhouse already. I had a huge learning curve. I had to get used, learn OSHA, learn EPA and different regulatory agencies and consensus standards. And still, it's overwhelming. It's mind-boggling how many rules we have. But yeah, I think the transition worked very well for me. I was used to dealing with regulators, inspectors coming in to, inspect our food facilities. And it really isn't that different. It's still important. It still has a high risk and high consequence, whether you eat food or you have hazards from performing work. So that was my transition. An opportunity opened itself up to me. I love to learn, take a challenge. It's definitely been challenging. I'm a young safety professional, only 5 years of experience. So my perspective may not be the same as a 30-year veteran. So yeah.
And on that note, like a lot of the people that I speak to who are closer to the end of their career didn't necessarily get a formal safety education. I'm not sure that I'm sure there's been OHS training, but I think there's more now than there has ever been before. And I think a lot of people who've been in safety for a long time didn't necessarily have like a formal education, a degree in this. And you did get that opportunity. So I'm wondering, what did you think about the formal part of the education that you received? Like, is there anything that you would change? Do you think it prepared you well?
Yeah, obviously it was a great program that I went through at UAB, and I would recommend it to anybody. Is it the magic elixir, right? Is it going to make me the perfect safety professional and guarantee success in the profession and guarantee success for an organization? No. I don't think there's any magic list of ingredients, right? Like you need to take this training, this degree, and that you're all set. Because if somebody's found that magic list of ingredients in that recipe, we'd all be doing it, right? And we'd all have success. I do think that a lot of people have been in safety for a while, maybe learned a little bit more hands-on, a little bit closer to the work back in the day, and not as overwhelmed with rules and all this learning and all these standards and stuff. And today it's really turned into this huge, I call it colloidal safety, just all kinds of terms, theories, concepts, methods. It seems like every day somebody comes out with something. So it can be overwhelming for someone that's been doing it for 30 years. They probably think a lot of that stuff is just, this is how I did this 30 years ago and it's worked for me. And that's fine. And there's nothing wrong with that. And that may be, maybe true. I think it's different for every organization. It's different for every culture.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier that, when we spoke earlier, that diving into safety topics when you were still sort of a total beginner was overwhelming. So I'm wondering, can you describe how that was for you, and maybe how did you find your way out of the overwhelm? Or did you?
That's a great question. I don't know if you'll ever find yourself out of the overwhelm as a safety professional. I think that just comes with the job. But yeah, it definitely at first getting into the UAB program and kind of new in safety, seeing all these theories. I have a big presence on LinkedIn, so you see all the methods, all the theories, everything that people's working on, and you're trying at the same time because I'm still a work professional. So I'm like, okay, will this work for my workplace? I don't know if this is gonna work for my culture. This might work for that team, but not that department. And then it's like, man, what is the answer? Because I'd also read a lot of books on things, whether it was Charles Perrow, and it's like, wow, it was definitely overwhelming. And as I got through the UAB program, it was much more focused on, we did risk assessments and a lot of stuff like that, and drafting, you know, system programs, but there was also HOP, and that kind of helps. It's so broad that it kind of captures a lot of those, and you can kind of see how they all connect and make sense because of how broad the HOP principles are, if that makes sense. And so that's kind of when it made more sense to me.
I think a lot of university programs, anyway, they're not so much telling you what to think, but trying to show you how to think, or think critically. And HOP seems like a model, like a filter through which you can look at safety, for example. Do you have advice if there are listeners out there who are also feeling overwhelmed, sort of regardless of where they are in their safety career? Do you have any advice for them?
I always like to say that I think safety is 50% rules and 50% about care and the humanistic side of things. And you can't have one without the other. You need both. And so if you're looking at a program, like UAB was a good program. It had some technical classes, learned about some of those rules, but it also had some of that humanistic side of things where there was classes about language and HOP and different things like that. And I think you need that blend. You definitely need that blend going forward. There's going to continue to be more rules. That's not going anywhere. More and more rules, but that's going to sell the humanistic side even more because you need to be able to influence those people to follow those rules and learn, why those rules don't get followed, right? Once you get back into the mapping and the sense making. So we want to have that blended approach.
Yeah, I was thinking a lot of safety sort of formal education came through engineering programs, or I think lived in engineering departments, for example. And I'm seeing this shift where people are saying, what about the humanities? What about the social sciences, and psychology, of course? So, yeah. What is your sense of the past, like looking at the industry as a whole? What's your sense of the past evolution of safety, and what are your hopes for the future of the safety industry?
Yeah, so very similar to the last message. I think what I'm still seeing is a lot of people stuck in traditional safety management, that safety officer, safety cop mentality where you see it with behavior-based safety. Organizations still stuck on that. It may be great, but they're not rolling it out right. They're still calling it behavior, and that has a negative connotation to it. Why don't we call it learning-based safety? So I still think there's a lot of work to be done in the safety profession to bring in the humanistic side of safety, whether it's psychology, psychosocial is getting a lot of attention, cognitive science, stuff that people can't measure, but it definitely, like, we're human, so we can't ignore it. We're not machines. We don't want just to focus 100% on the rules. And I think there's still a lot of work to be done there to move safety in a direction and get those, those fatalities that we can't seem to get down, that have stalled for the last 2 decades.
Yeah, I think there's a discomfort with uncertainty, which brings us all the way back to if you can't measure it, it makes people uncomfortable, but it's very difficult to measure culture or influence and that sort of thing. If you were given a magic wand, where would you focus, assuming that you wouldn't wish for anything else, where would you focus training for the next generation of safety professionals?
That's a great question. We talked a lot about learning today, and I think that has to be a huge focus for safety professionals. And that's a broad topic. So a lot of stuff we mentioned today, teaching safety professionals humble inquiry, the TEDS questions, tell me, explain to me, describe to me, show me, like open-ended questions, how to have build authenticity, build those working relationships in the workplace, earn that respect, and really show genuine care. Those soft skills. I think organizations and just business in general is still continuing in the wrong direction with AI, software, technology, computer programs, and all this stuff that's doing the work for us. And we're eroding the human side. And I think we need to recognize that with these new safety professionals, that the human side is just as important, and we can't continue to use AI to do our job for us. Going out there and having a conversation with somebody and building a good working relationship with them is going to help me learn about their job, their work, what their challenges are, what they need. And I think that says a lot, that AI is not going to do that. AI is not going to go out and have a conversation with that person and then reveal all these normalizations, these things, these error traps, these ways, the way they do things. AI might be able to point out that that's a hazard right there because OSHA 1910-146 says so, but it's not going to say, well, this, and this creates an error trap.
Yeah, and it's not going to say, like, I walked in the room and sensed from the mood that, this is not psychologically safe, or, people are speaking up, but I can see in their eyes that they're frightened, or, that sort of thing.
Absolutely. Yep.
If you could go back in time to the beginning of your safety career, and however you define that, what's one piece of advice that you might give yourself?
Yeah, and that wasn't that long ago, right? That was only 5 years ago. So you make it sound like go back 3 decades.
Well, however you define it, I mean, I suppose you could define it as the beginning of your entire career, but I'm more focused on the safety area.
Same thing that we kind of talked about. I started off because I understood that I came out of quality, but I had a learning curve. So I immediately took an OSHA 30, a 24-hour environmental, started reading the 1910 book, like started creating spreadsheets on all the standards and where we were and if we were compliant, like I became standard crazy and spent so much time early on in my career with that. And it really wasn't until I got into the UAB program and realized that, there's so much more to it than that, right? The psychology of things, the cognitive science, human factors. I wish that I had not necessarily didn't focus on the standards, but did a little bit of both early on. And I don't think I really started. And I think a lot of young safety professionals are the same way. They're like, I got to get my 500 classes. I got to get my 30. I got all these certificates, learn these standards. That's not the right direction. Some people can hear me say that and be like, whoa, we got rules. We absolutely have rules.
Of course.
Absolutely. Yeah. But it's how we get people to understand those rules, why they're important, what are the stories behind these rules. There's always a story behind why there's a rule in place, and it's usually a pretty impactful story. That's the human side of things, right? It's so important.
So, how can our listeners learn more about really any of the topics that we've discussed today? Are there books or groups, websites that you would recommend that they explore?
Yeah, absolutely. There's tons of books out there. I have a book that I recommend. I don't know if I can share it or show it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So this is one that I always had at my desk in my office and highly recommended to leaders in the organization. And it's what we just talked about, from compliance to care. It's the psychology, it's the assumptions, the culture, and really trying to learn how to create those working relationships, that psychological safety, and a lot of stuff that starts to transform our mindset around. And it's great. It has practical examples in there. So the author's Clive Lloyd. He's on LinkedIn. I highly recommend following him. This is a quick read. It's an easy, user-friendly read. It's maybe 100 pages. It's not super technical. Like I hate those technical books where it's like I gotta take a 1 week break or something, right? You can read this in a couple days, and there's a lot of aha moments. Like, oh, this is something I can work on as a leader. Oh, we do this. We don't mean to, but this is what is the result of why doing this. And it's really great. It gets into zero harm and a lot of things that organizations still do and don't realize, some of the cons and negative effects of those things. So great book. Highly recommend it, and following him on LinkedIn.
And since you set me up so well, we actually have an episode where I interviewed Clive Lloyd about that book, and we will be doing sneak peek here, but I will be interviewing him again on sort of a deeper dive into the book. So pay attention for that. Yes, it's the earlier one is one of our more popular episodes. So I think it's obviously resonating with people. Where can our listeners find you on the web?
Yeah, so I have a big presence on LinkedIn, linkedin.com /the EHS guy. So please follow me. I like to write articles on there, things that I get in my mind. I just got to write it down and talk a lot about this stuff that we mentioned here today.
Great. Well, that is this week's show. Thanks for joining me, Trevor.
Absolutely. I'm honored to be here.
And we'll link to your LinkedIn file in the show notes. So look for that, folks. And a big thank you to our listeners and the Safety Labs team. Bye for now. This podcast is created by Safety Products Global, the world's leading manufacturer of safety knives. Through our trusted brands, Clever, Slice, and PHC, we empower companies to prevent injuries by providing safer cutting tools for every material and application. Until next time, stay safe.